No, it couldn't be. The boy's tiny tracks, covered by colossal paw prints that could only belong to the white demons. Hunter Adar, strapped to his makeshift sled chair, felt the icy tremor of the ground through his gloved hands. The blizzard, a white fury of 71 degrees, tried to tear him away, but the scent of the 7 giant polar bears, each weighing as much as a rhinoceros, was stronger than the wind. His body might betray him, but his eagle eyes and ancestral mind detected the trapped child just a few meters away, a fragile speck between the colossal shadows. He knew that to save little Petya and the hope of his village, he would have to face an impossible battle, and one slip would mean the end, not only for him, but for everyone. Adar gritted his teeth, the icy air cutting his throat with each deep breath. His eyes, accustomed to the white vastness, swept the landscape, searching for any sign, any break in the blizzard's fury that might offer an advantage. He couldn't walk, but his arms, once strong enough to wield a bow and throw a spear, were now the only force that moved him. With a grunt of effort, he plunged the sharpened tips of his ice staffs into the compacted snow, pulling the sled forward, centimeter by centimeter, towards the imminent danger. Each movement was an agony, a cruel reminder of his condition, but the image of Petya, so small and helpless, kindled a fire in his chest that not even Yakutia's most intense cold could extinguish. Adar felt the bear's presence even before he saw them clearly. They were gigantic shadows, moving with terrifying slowness, like animated ice mountains. Their roars, though muffled by the blizzard, vibrated in the air, a guttural sound that spoke of hunger and primal instinct. Petya was there, huddled by a small snowdrift, a dark, trembling speck in the vast white. The boy wasn't crying. Perhaps he was in shock, or perhaps the cold had already stolen his voice. Adar pressed his lips together, a deep furrow marking his brow. There was no time for hesitation, nor for the fear that tried to seep into his bones. He approached as close as he could without alerting the predators to his immediate presence. Ancestral wisdom whispered in his mind, reminding him of his grandfather's teachings about the ice spirits and the great bears. It wasn't a hunt of brute force, but of mind, of respect, and of a deep understanding of nature. Adar knew these white colossi weren't just animals. They were forces of nature, hungry and desperate, cornered by the same blizzard that isolated his village. The challenge wasn't to kill them, but to convince them to retreat, to choose life over confrontation, to leave Petya. His eyes fixed on the bears, searching for the leader, the oldest, the one who carried the experience of endless winters. He needed a plan, something that went beyond the physical strength he lacked. His ice staffs were not weapons against these beasts, but extensions of his will. Adar took a deep breath, the vapor freezing on his lips. He needed every fiber of his courage, every fragment of his wisdom. Petya depended on him. The village depended on him. And at that moment, in the heart of the white hell, Adar felt the responsibility weigh on his shoulders, but also a renewed strength, an unwavering determination. He was not just a paralyzed hunter, he was the guardian of his people, and he would not fail. His muscles ached, but his spirit soared, ready for the battle that was unfolding. Adar raised his head, his eyes squinting against the snowflakes whipping his face. The leader of the bears, an imposing male with ancient scars adorning his muzzle, was closer, sniffing the air with dangerous curiosity. Its small, dark eyes swept the landscape, pausing briefly on Adar, before returning to Petya's huddled figure. The boy, almost invisible under the blanket of snow, trembled uncontrollably, a small mound of fragile life at the mercy of the giants. Adar felt a tightening in his chest, a pain that was not physical, but of the soul, seeing the child's vulnerability. With a monumental effort, Adar moved his sled a few centimeters to the side, positioning himself so that the bears would have to see him clearly before reaching Petya. He had no weapons, only his voice and the strength of his conviction. He took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs, and then a deep, guttural sound erupted from his chest. It was not a cry of fear nor of anger, but an ancestral call, a grave melody that echoed the winds of Yakutia and the roars of wild animals. It was the voice of a hunter, not a predator, but a guardian. The bears stopped, heads raised, pointed ears swiveling to catch the unusual sound. The leader, in particular, tilted its head, its eyes fixed on Adar. There was a primitive intelligence in those gazes, a tacit understanding that this man, motionless on his sled, was neither common prey nor a direct threat. He was something different, something that the wisdom of generations of polar bears had not easily categorized. Adar held his gaze firm, without wavering, conveying a message of respect and, paradoxically, of authority. With each note of his voice, Adar felt ancestral energy flow through him, connecting him to the earth, to the ice, to the very spirits of the animals. He wasn't trying to intimidate them with force, but with the truth of his intention, to protect defenseless life. His gloved fingers gripped his ice staffs, not as weapons, but as anchors, steadying him in that moment of pure tension. Adar knew that one false step, one sign of weakness, could be fatal. He needed the bears to understand that the hunt they sought was not worth the confrontation with the determination of a man who had overcome death itself. The other 6 bears, though younger and more impatient, seemed to follow the leader's example, maintaining a cautious distance. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as if they were assessing the situation, weighing the risks and rewards. Hunger was palpable in the air, a wild scent that mingled with the biting cold. Adar knew he couldn't keep them away for long with just his voice. He needed more, something that would appeal to the deepest instinct of these animals, something that would make them choose the path of retreat. His eyes swept the landscape again, searching for a solution, a crack in the predator's resolve. The relentless blizzard continued to dance around them, creating illusions of movement and hiding dangers. Petya coughed weakly, an almost inaudible sound, but one that resonated in Adar's heart like thunder. Time was running out. He needed to act, and fast, before the cold or the bear's hunger sealed the boy's fate. Adar closed his eyes for an instant, seeking clarity amidst the chaos. The wisdom his grandfather had taught him about the language of the wind and the messages of the ice. He was the guardian, and he would not fail. Adar opened his eyes, a new light of understanding dancing in his tired gaze. It wasn't about strength, but about the essence of life. His grandfather always said that the ice and wind had a language, and the great bears understood the whispers of the earth. With a slow movement, Adar extended his gloved hand and touched the snow, feeling the subtle vibration of the ground, the breath of the frozen world. He couldn't run, but he could feel. He couldn't fight, but he could communicate. The leader of the bears, the old one with the scarred muzzle, took a hesitant step, its colossal weight making the snow creak, its black eyes, deep as frozen lakes, fixed on Adar, a mixture of curiosity and hunger. The other 6, younger bears, began to circle, their white bodies almost invisible against the blizzard, tightening the encirclement around Petya. The boy sobbed, a faint sound that Adar felt more than heard, and a new wave of urgency washed over him. Adar knew that time was an enemy as relentless as the cold. He needed something that would speak directly to the bear's primal instinct, that would make them question the reward of the hunt. With effort, he pulled a small leather pouch from his coat. From it, he took out a handful of dried herbs and aromatic resins, carefully collected. These were the herbs of memory, used in ancient rituals to calm spirits and ward off ill omens. With trembling fingers, Adar crushed the herbs, releasing a strong, earthy aroma that even in the icy air began to spread. He knew the bear's sense of smell was 1,000 times keener. It was a risky gamble, an attempt to confuse their senses, to introduce an unknown element that might break the focus of the hunt. He scattered the herbs on the snow, creating an invisible barrier between himself and the predators downwind. The group leader stopped, sniffing the air intently. Its nostrils flared, and it let out a low snort, a sound of uncertainty. The aroma was not threatening, but strange, unclassifiable. The other bears also reacted, their heads rising, their movements becoming slower and more cautious. Ada observed each reaction, each tremor, each averted gaze. He needed doubt to set in, for hunger to be replaced by caution. Petya, still huddled, raised his head, his eyes wide, observing the scene. He didn't understand what Ada was doing, but he felt the change in the atmosphere, the hesitation of the white giants. Ada, with a faint smile, tried to convey confidence to the boy. "Hold on. Little one," he thought, "the guardian is here." With the bear's attention diverted, Adar pulled his sled harder in a gentle arc to approach Petya. Each pull was a Herculean effort, his arms burning, but the image of the boy, so close and fragile, was his fuel. The blizzard fell, but for a brief instant the tense silence between the man, the boy, and the white colossi was broken by the wind and the rustling of the herbs. Adar knew the battle was far from over, but he had found an opening, a chance to fight with wisdom, with his people's deep connection to the earth. He was the guardian, and he would not fail. The sled glided over the compacted snow, its runners creaking softly, a sound almost inaudible in the wind's howl. Adar felt his body exhausted, every muscle protesting, but he couldn't stop. Petya was a few meters away, eyes wide with fear and cold, but now also with a glimmer of hope that ignited as Adar approached. The hunter extended one gloved hand in a reassuring gesture, a silent invitation to the boy. He needed Petya to trust him, to find the strength to move, even if just a little. The bears, still intrigued by the aroma of the herbs, kept their distance. The leader, however, didn't seem entirely convinced. Its keen eyes followed Adar's every move, as if trying to decipher the enigma of this motionless man who dared to challenge them. The others, younger, snorted and pawed at the snow, impatience growing, hunger speaking louder than curiosity. Adar knew the truce was fragile, a thin thread that could break at any moment. "Petya!" Adar's voice was a hoarse but firm whisper, laden with gentle authority. "Come, crawl to the sled. Quick, little warrior." The boy, with numb legs and a trembling body, tried to move. His small fingers, already purplish from the cold, scraped the snow, and he began to drag himself, a slow and painful movement. Adar felt a pang of despair. Time was running out. With a last, desperate pull, Adar managed to position the sled beside Petya. He leaned over, stretching his arm as far as he could, his shoulder muscles burning. "Take my hand, Petya, now!" The boy, with a faint whimper, extended his small hand, and Adar gripped it firmly, feeling the icy skin and the fragility of the bones. With all the strength he had left, the hunter pulled Petya onto the sled, nestling him against his own body, trying to transfer some of his warmth. The relief was momentary. The instant Petya was safe on the sled, the leader of the bears let out a low growl, a sound that made the ice vibrate. The aroma of the herbs seemed to have lost some of its effect, or the sight of moving prey reactivated the hunting instinct. The 6 younger bears advanced, their heavy steps breaking the silence, the hunger in their eyes becoming undeniable. Adar knew he couldn't flee. His sled, though special, was no match for the speed and strength of the colossi. He needed one last strategy, something that appealed not to confusion, but to respect, to the very essence of life in Yakutia. His eyes fixed on the approaching bears, and he raised his head, his voice, now stronger, echoing in the wind. "Spirits of the ice, children of the snow, respect life." He wasn't speaking only to the bears, but to nature itself, to the ancestors, to the wild heart of Yakutia. Petya, huddled in his arms, felt the warmth of Ada's body and the vibration of his voice. It was a prayer, a challenge, an appeal. The bears stopped again, not out of fear, but out of a strange hesitation, as if Adar's voice had touched something deep within them, an echo of ancient wisdom they also shared. Adar knew the final battle would not be one of strength, but of spirit. He was the guardian, and Petya's life was in his hands. Adar pressed Petya against his chest, feeling the boy's tremor and the exhaustion that weighed upon him. His eyes, however, radiated unwavering determination. He was not just a man. He was the voice of a lineage, the echo of 1,000 winters, and the wisdom of his people flowed through his veins. The bears, with their gigantic paws, were a few meters away, but the hesitation in their eyes, the pause in their movements, was the opening Adar needed. He knew he couldn't fight brute force, but he could speak to the wild soul that inhabited those colossi. With an effort that cost him the last drop of energy, Adar raised his head again, not to challenge, but to connect. His voice, now softer but laden with ancestral authority, began to intone an ancient melody, a song that spoke of the interconnectedness of all life in Yakutia. It was the song of the eternal ice, taught by his grandfather, a melody that celebrated balance, fair hunting, and respect for the land. He described not with words, but with the emotion in his voice, the beauty of the snow, the harshness of winter, and the need for every creature to find its place without disturbing harmony. The bears, especially the leader, tilted their heads. The growl it had let out before transformed into a low grunt, almost a murmur. Adar felt the vibration of the ground, not just from the bear's steps, but from the earth itself, responding to his song. He extended his free hand, not to ward them off, but to offer, in a symbolic gesture, peace and understanding. He had no food to give them, but he offered something deeper. The recognition of their sovereignty, the promise that the village would honor nature, and that the boy, Petya, was part of the life that needed to be protected, not consumed. The leader bear's eyes fixed on Adar's. There was no longer pure hunger there, but a complexity, a recognition. It was as if Adar's melody had awakened an ancestral memory in the predators, an instinct deeper than immediate hunting. The younger bears, though still agitated, began to retreat slowly, following the example of the old leader. One by one they turned their backs, their massive forms disappearing into the blizzard, like ice mountains detaching from the landscape. Petya, in his arms, let out a trembling sigh, but one of relief. He pressed himself closer to Adar, feeling the warmth of the hunter's body and the strong beat of his heart. Adar, exhausted, closed his eyes for an instant, feeling the weight of victory and immense gratitude. He had succeeded. His voice, his wisdom, his spirit had prevailed over brute force and hunger. The silence that followed was almost as oppressive as the bear's roar, but now it was a silence of peace, broken only by the wind's howl and the snowflakes dancing around. Adar opened his eyes, looking at the emptiness where the bears had been. The blizzard remained relentless, and the cold bit at his skin, but the immediate danger had passed. He had rescued Petya, but the journey back to the village through the white hell was still to come. He was the guardian, and the resilience of his people would drive him forward. Adar felt Yakutia's intense cold, which for a moment had been forgotten in the tension of the confrontation, bite at his skin again. Petya, nestled in his arms, was still trembling violently, and the hunter realized the boy urgently needed warmth and shelter. The blizzard, though the bears had left, had not lessened its fury. Snowflakes the size of coins whipped through the air, blinding him and making each breath an icy effort. Adar knew the way back would be as treacherous as the journey there, perhaps even more so, as his energy was almost depleted. With his free hand, Adar adjusted the fur blanket covering Petya, trying to wrap him even tighter. The boy's small body was icy cold, and his lips, once purplish, now looked almost white. "Hold on, little one," Adar murmured, his voice hoarse. "We're almost there." He knew it was a white lie. The village was many hours away, and with each passing minute, the danger of hypothermia increased for Petya. Adar plunged his ice staffs into the snow and pulled the sled, feeling the searing pain in his shoulders and arms. Each movement was a protest from his fatigued muscles, but the image of Petya, so fragile, was what propelled him. He needed to find temporary shelter, a place where they could protect themselves from the biting wind and perhaps light a small fire to warm the boy. His eyes, even with almost zero visibility, swept the landscape, searching for any rock formation or slope that could offer refuge. As he advanced, Adar felt a subtle vibration through the runners of his sled, an almost imperceptible sound that made him stop. It wasn't the wind, nor the creaking of the snow beneath the sled. It was something deeper, a whisper of the ice that his grandfather had taught him to decipher. The sound was irregular, like a heart beating out of rhythm, and it came from below. A sense of dread chilled his spine. He had faced the bears, but the ice cracking beneath his feet was a silent and relentless enemy. "Don't move, Petya," Ada whispered, his voice tense. He reached out and touched the snow ahead, feeling the thin crust that covered something deeper. The sound intensified, a low, continuous moan. He was on a layer of thin ice, a treacherous trap that the blizzard had perfectly disguised. One false step and they would fall into a frozen abyss with no chance of return. Adar felt cold sweat trickle down his forehead, despite the biting cold. Adar looked at Petya, who watched him with wide eyes, not understanding the new threat, but sensing the urgency in the hunter's voice. The boy coughed again, a weak sound that broke the tense silence. Adar needed to act fast. He couldn't retreat, as the ice behind them was also uncertain. The only option was to move forward, but with extreme caution, seeking a safe path through the invisible trap. With the dexterity that only years of experience on ice could provide, Adar began to test the path ahead with the tip of one of his staffs. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't walk, but his arms were his eyes and his legs. Each touch was slow, deliberate, seeking the ice's resistance, the solidity that would separate him from the abyss. Petya, feeling the careful movement of the sled, clung tighter to Adar, his small body trembling not only from cold, but now also from an instinctive fear. Adar felt the ice groan beneath the sled, like a living creature protesting against his weight. The sound was deafening in his ears, even with the blizzard's howl. He needed to find a bridge, a path of thicker ice that could support their weight. His muscles burned, but he ignored the pain, focusing only on the ice's vibration and Petya's faint breath. The boy's life and his own depended on his ability to decipher the whispers of the ice, to read the invisible tracks that nature had left. He was the guardian, and Yakutia would not defeat him. With superhuman effort, Adar firmly planted his left staff into what seemed to be a more solid layer of ice to his right. The sound guided him, a faint promise of safety. He pulled the sled with his right arm, dragging it slowly, centimeter by centimeter, out of the most dangerous area. Petya, huddled against his chest, let out a whimper. Adar felt the boy's body grow even colder and pressed him tighter, trying to transfer the remaining warmth from his own exhausted body. "Almost there, little one," he whispered, more to himself than to the child, whose consciousness seemed to be fading. Adar knew that every second was crucial. Hypothermia was an invisible and relentless enemy. His eyes, burning with fatigue and the biting cold, swept the landscape, desperately searching for a sign, a crack, anything that indicated a change in the ice pattern. He remembered his grandfather's lessons, who said that the oldest ice had a slightly darker color, a bluish tint that revealed its thickness, but the blizzard was so dense that it turned everything into a white and indistinct veil. He continued to test the path, tapping his staff carefully, listening to the sound the ice made when touched. A hollow sound meant danger, a more solid sound, a chance. Adar moved the sled in a delicate arc, avoiding the area where the vibration was most intense. His arms trembled uncontrollably, and a sharp pain spread through his shoulders. Adar felt his heart pounding in his chest, not only from the effort, but from the anxiety that gnawed at him. Petya's life depended on his precision, on his intuition. Suddenly, the staff sank a little deeper than expected. It wasn't thin ice, but deep snow accumulated over a depression. Adar felt a chill run down his spine. A different trap, but equally dangerous. The sled could get stuck, and they wouldn't have the strength to get out. With a clear mind, despite the exhaustion, Adar used the staff as a lever, pushing the sled backward with renewed, almost desperate force. The heavy snow clung to the runners, making the movement agonizing. Petya coughed again, and Adar realized the boy was losing the battle against the cold. He needed shelter, warmth, and fast. Adar looked at the sky, though he could see nothing but the white fury. A small break in the blizzard, a glimpse of a distant rocky peak, ignited a spark of hope. It was a place he knew, a small cave that served as shelter for hunters during blizzards. It was far, but it was their only chance. With a new purpose, Adar began to move the sled towards the peak, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion, the cold that seeped into every fiber of his being. He knew the path would still be long and dangerous, but now he had a clear objective. The ice beneath them was still treacherous, but the sight of the peak, even if fleeting, was a beacon amidst the white darkness. He was the guardian, and he would not fail. Adar squeezed Petya tighter, feeling the small life in his arms, and the promise of shelter, even if distant, propelled his spirit. The wind howled, but now it seemed to carry a melody of hope, a whisper that perhaps Yakutia had not yet defeated them. Adar squeezed Petya tightly, the small life in his arms. The promise of the rocky peak, a distant shelter, propelled his spirit. The wind howled, carrying hope, a whisper that Yakutia would not defeat them. With the refuge in mind, Adar plunged his staffs into the snow, pulling the sled with determination that defied exhaustion. Every centimeter was a battle. The deep snow clung to the runners, demanding Herculean effort. His muscles screamed, but Petya, nestled and trembling, was the fire that kept him going. Petya, almost inert, was breathing shallowly. The warmth Adar tried to transfer was insufficient against the relentless cold. The boy's skin was colder, and a weak cough escaped his pale lips. Adar brushed his face against Petya's frozen hair, seeking to share warmth. "Don't give up, little one," he murmured, his voice choked. Time was his cruelest enemy. The cave was their only salvation. The terrain ahead rose gently, an almost imperceptible incline, which for Adar's sled was like climbing a mountain. He used all his strength and technique, planting staffs at precise angles, pulling and pushing with his shoulders and back. The sled slid, stopped, and Adar started again, feeling cold sweat trickle down. His eyes, almost closed by the blizzard, searched for any shadow that might indicate a less arduous passage. A memory of his grandfather surfaced, teachings on how snow accumulated on slopes, creating rivers of more compacted snow. Adar adjusted his route, moving the sled in a calculated zigzag, following invisible contours. The movement was slower, but the resistance decreased, and each pull became less excruciating. He felt gratitude for the ancestral wisdom, a legacy that saved 2 lives. The connection with his ancestors was an internal warmth. Suddenly, his arms failed. The sled stopped abruptly, and Adar felt his head spin. Dizziness hit him, and his eyes closed. Despair threatened to swallow him. He was exhausted beyond any limit, but Petya's weight, his faint breath, brought him back. He couldn't give up. Adar opened his eyes, His vision blurred and saw Petya's pale face. A tear froze on his cheek, but it was from anger against weakness, not surrender. With a silent roar of pure will, Adar plunged his staffs again. A force seemed to come from his Yakutian roots, from his promise to the village. He pulled, and the sled moved. The rocky peak, once a glimpse, now seemed closer, its dark forms outlining themselves in the blizzard. It was a beacon of hope. Adar knew that each pull was a prayer, each movement an act of faith. He continued, his mind focused on the next pull, the next breath, on Petya's warmth. Pain was a constant companion, but he embraced it, transforming it into fuel. Adar felt himself part of the ice, of the wind, an extension of Yakutia itself, which refused to be broken. The cave was not just a physical shelter, it was the promise of life, of warmth, of a new beginning for Petya and for him. He was the guardian, and his mission was almost accomplished. The last few meters were brutal. Adar felt his body tremble, his vision darken. The wind's howl diminished, the snow stopped whipping. He had reached the base of the peak. Ahead of him, a dark opening in the rock, almost hidden by the snow, promised refuge. Adar, with a final effort, pulled the sled into the cave, feeling the immediate relief as the wind ceased. They were safe. Petya, still in his arms, let out a faint whimper, and Adar knew that the battle for the boy's life was just beginning, but now they had a real chance to survive. Adar, gasping and with muscles spasming, pushed the sled into the cave. The air inside was less biting, but still icy. Petya, an inert weight in his arms, trembled more weakly, an alarming sign of hypothermia. Adar needed fire, fast. His eyes swept the interior. Cold rock, loose stones, no sign of fuel. A wave of despair hit Adar. He had overcome bears and treacherous ice, but now he faced a lack of resources and the weakness of his body. How would a paralyzed man light a fire without firewood? The question echoed, a silent scream. He leaned over Petya, feeling his faint breath, bluish lips, half open, glazed eyes. Adar touched the boy's forehead, cold as ice. A deep fear, colder than Yakutia, gripped his heart. He could not fail. Memories of his grandfather, the great shaman, came to mind. Adar, my grandson, fire is not just warmth, it is spirit, it is the will to live. Adar closed his eyes, seeking that inner flame. He remembered an ancient technique for scarcity of firewood. It wouldn't be a big fire, but perhaps enough. With trembling hands, Adar fumbled on the ground, finding 2 smooth stones. He positioned them between his legs, using pressure to steady them. With a slow and painful movement, he began to rub one against the other, seeking sparks. His exhausted arms protested, but Petya's image was his fuel. The sparks were few and weak. Adar needed something to catch fire. His eyes fell upon Petya's fur blanket, the only dry and fibrous thing. He hesitated. Expose the boy to the cold? Without fire, Petya wouldn't stand a chance. With a lump in his throat, Adar pulled a small piece from the edge of the blanket, tearing it with his teeth and nails. A necessary sacrifice. He placed the piece of fur between the stones and began rubbing again, with force and desperation. The smell of burnt stone and fur filled the air. Finally, a small spark fell onto the fur and a wisp of smoke rose. Adar blew gently, carefully, and the spark became an incandescent point. He protected it with his hands, feeling the faint warmth. A promise. Adar pulled Petya closer, nestling the smoldering piece of fur between them, protecting it with his own body. The warmth was minimal, but his grandfather's will, ancestral wisdom and love for Petya ignited a flame. He felt a tear roll down, a tear of painful hope. The fire reborn from his resilience was a crucial ally. Petya coughed again, a stronger sound, and Adar knew the fight continued, but with a real chance. With eyes in the dim light, Adar scanned the cave floor. He needed fuel to sustain the newborn life. With the tip of his staff, he fumbled in the rock crevices, searching for dry twigs or moss. The pain in his arms was constant, but Petya, breathing more regularly, was a balm to his exhausted soul. Suddenly, his fingers brushed against a tuft of dry grass, miraculously preserved under compacted snow. It was little, but valuable. Adar gathered it carefully, knowing it would burn quickly but would buy them time. He placed it delicately beside the ember. The hungry fire licked at the new fuel, growing. The light expanded, revealing more of the cave. Adar watched Petya. His face was pale, but the bluish tint of his lips was fading. A deep sigh escaped him. A small victory. He touched the boy's forehead, still cold but no longer deadly. Gratitude flooded his chest for the ancestral wisdom, resilience, and the life he fought to preserve. Memories of his grandfather, the old shaman, came to mind. Fire, Adar, is a gift from the earth, but to keep it alive you need patience and respect. It feeds not only on wood, but on your own will. Adar smiled. His will was the strongest fuel. With the fire more stable, he used his staff to push stones, creating a circle to contain the heat and protect it from the wind. As the fire crackled, Adar felt hunger and thirst, but Petya was the priority. He needed to warm the boy, and if the fire held, melt snow for water. He looked up at the cave entrance. The blizzard roared, but the rock was a shield. Every moment of warmth was a step towards Petya's recovery. The warmth of the small fire, almost imperceptible, was a blessing for Petya. The boy stirred slightly in Adar's arms, a subtle movement that made the hunter's heart leap. Petya opened his eyes, blinking, and fixed his gaze on Adar. "Adar," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. Adar felt a lump in his throat. That sound, his name, was more potent than any bear's roar, warmer than any bonfire. It was proof that Petya was there, fighting. "I'm here, little one," Adar replied, his voice choked. He squeezed Petya, a gesture of unbreakable affection and protection. The connection between them, forged in ice and danger, was eternal. Adar knew the night would be long. The fight against cold and exhaustion would continue. But with the fire crackling and Petya showing signs of life, there was new strength in his spirit. He was the guardian, and the flame of life, almost extinguished, burned with renewed promise. Yakutia was relentless, but human resilience, driven by love and ancestral wisdom, was more powerful. He would take him back to the village. The night wore on, and with it, the blizzard's fury seemed to intensify, its howl echoing in the cave like an ancestral lament. The small fire, despite Adar's efforts, began to dwindle again. The dry grass had burned quickly, and the piece of Petya's blanket was reduced to ashes. Adar felt his body grow heavy, his eyes burning with fatigue. Sleep, a treacherous enemy, tried to drag him into darkness, but he resisted with all his might. If he slept, the fire would die, and with it, Petya's last hope. The boy, though more stable, was still fragile. Adar watched Petya's face, illuminated by the last embers. The fear of failure was an icy grip in his chest, more intense than Yakutia's cold. He had promised the village and himself that he would bring Petya back. He could not break that promise. With a groan of effort, Adar reached out, fumbling on the cave floor again. He needed something, anything, to feed the fire. His fingers brushed against small fragments of tree bark, brought by the wind and deposited in a crevice. It was a minuscule amount, but Adar gathered it with the reverence of one who finds gold. With meticulous care, he placed the fragments on the embers, blowing gently. The fire crackled, a small burst of life, and Adar felt momentary relief, but he knew it was only a palliative. The real battle was against time and scarcity. Petya coughed again, a stronger sound, and opened his eyes. Cold! he whispered, his lips trembling. Adar felt his heart clench. The boy was conscious of the cold, which was a good sign, but also a reminder of the urgency. "It will pass soon, little one." "The fire is here," Adar replied, trying to infuse confidence into his exhausted voice. He pressed Petya against him, sharing the warmth of his own body, which seemed to diminish with each passing minute. Adar knew he needed more. His eyes swept the cave, searching for a solution. His gaze fell upon the sled. The underside, made of light, resistant wood, was covered by a thin layer of resin to protect it from the ice. If he could scrape off some of the resin, perhaps he could feed the fire for longer. It was a risk. The sled was his only means of locomotion, his link to the world. Damaging it would compromise the journey back. But Petya was the priority. With a resigned sigh, Ida used the tip of his staff to delicately scrape the resin from the underside of the sled. Each scrape was an act of sacrifice, a piece of his own hope of return. The resin, sticky and aromatic, began to burn with a more vigorous flame, releasing a sweet, woody scent into the cave. The warmth increased, and Adar felt Petya relax a little in his arms. The flame danced, illuminating Idar's face, marked by exhaustion, but also by unwavering determination. He had made the right choice. The sled could be repaired, but a lost life could never be recovered. The fire crackled, a beacon in the darkness, and Adar knew that for now they were safe. The battle against Yakutia, against death, was not yet over, but the flame of resilience, kindled with sacrifice and love, continued to burn. He was the guardian, and he would not fail. The resin burned with surprising persistence, an aromatic balm against the biting cold that still permeated the cave. The flame, once a fragile point, now danced with more vigor, casting flickering shadows on the rocky walls. Adar watched Petya, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep. His face less pale, his breathing more regular. The boy was wrapped in the blanket Adar had hastily mended, and the warmth of the hunter's body, combined with that of the fire, seemed to be winning the battle against hypothermia. Adar felt a deep relief, a relaxation that almost made him collapse. But he knew the vigil could not cease. With his staff, carefully, he pushed more resin shavings onto the embers, ensuring the flame wouldn't die. His eyes swept the interior of the cave again, this time with a clearer mind, less clouded by exhaustion. The firelight revealed a small crack in the wall, from which a trickle of water flowed, freezing into ice stalactites. Water! With renewed effort, Adar used his staff to break off some of the stalactites, collecting the pieces of ice in a small leather container he carried. He placed them near the fire, watching them melt slowly. Thirst was a constant ache in his throat, but Petya was the priority. As the ice melted, Adar felt his body protest. The muscles in his arms and shoulders were spasming, and the pain in his legs, though numb from paralysis, was a constant reminder of his sacrifice. He touched the sled, feeling the area where he had scraped the resin. A part was unprotected, vulnerable. The journey back would be even more challenging. A pang of worry hit him, but he pushed it away. First, Petya's life. The rest would come later. The sound of the wind outside began to diminish. The blizzard, which had roared for days, seemed to subside. Small pauses in the howl allowed Adar to hear the heavy silence of Yakutia, a silence that, paradoxically, brought hope. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the possibility of a clearer sky. When the water was warm, Adar gently woke Petya. The boy opened his eyes, now with a glimmer of consciousness. "Water," Petya murmured, his voice still weak, but with more strength. Adar helped him drink small sips, watching with satisfaction as the boy swallowed. The warmth of the water seemed to revitalize him. "We're safe, little one," Adar said, a tired but genuine smile lighting up his face. "The storm is calming. Soon we can go home." Petya looked at the fire, then at Idar, and a small smile appeared on his lips. He extended a trembling little hand and touched Idar's face. "Thank you," he whispered. Petya's words were like a balm to Idar's exhausted soul. All the suffering, all the pain, all the sacrifice were worth it for that simple thank you. He squeezed Petya's hand, a silent promise that the journey would not end there. Adar knew the way back would be arduous, with the damaged sled and his own physical limitations. But the sight of a recovered Petya, the flame of renewed life in his eyes, was the fuel he needed. Human resilience, driven by love and ancestral wisdom, had triumphed over Yakutia's fury. The village awaited them, and he would take them home, proving that true strength lies not only in muscles, but in the unbreakable will to protect and love. The sun, still invisible, was already beginning to tint the horizon with a pale pink, promising a new day of hope. The sun, still invisible, was already beginning to tint the horizon with a pale pink, promising a new day of hope. Adar observed the subtle change in color, feeling the intense cold of dawn begin to recede. The blizzard had silenced, leaving behind a landscape of untouched snow, glistening under the nascent light. Petya, nestled in his arms, slept deeply, his face serene, his cheeks with a faint blush that was no longer the blue of extreme cold. Idar felt a warmth spread through his chest, a warmth that did not come from the fire, but from the life he had helped preserve. With care not to wake the boy, Adar adjusted the fur blanket. His own muscles screamed in protest, each movement a torture, but exhaustion was now a familiar companion, almost a sign that he had reached his limit and surpassed it. He looked at the sled, the scraped underside revealing the raw wood. The journey back would be slower, more arduous, but the deadly urgency had diminished. Now it was a matter of perseverance and faith. Adar used his staff to extinguish the last embers of the fire, ensuring they would leave no dangerous traces. The smell of burnt resin still lingered in the air, a reminder of the sacrifice made. He picked up Petya with a tenderness that only a father or a guardian could have, placing him back on the sled. The boy grumbled, but did not wake, trusting Adar's touch. With the sun finally peeking from behind the mountains, casting long blue shadows over the snow, Adar began to pull the sled out of the cave. The icy morning air hit him, but it was a different cold, a cold that seemed to purify, not threaten. He looked at the vast white wilderness ahead, the way back to the village. There were no tracks to follow, only the immensity, but Adar felt the direction in his bones, guided by memory and intuition. Each pull was a monumental effort. Adar's arms trembled, and he felt the pain radiate throughout his body. The sled, without the resin protection on part of its base, dragged with more difficulty through the deep snow. But Adar didn't stop. He thought of the village, of the worried faces, of the joy they would feel upon seeing Petya. He thought of his own paralysis, which for so long had made him feel like a burden, but which now transformed into a source of a different strength, a strength of spirit. Hours dragged on, marked only by the slow movement of the sun in the sky and the gasping rhythm of Idar's breath. Petya woke, drank more water, and seeing Adar's effort, tried to help, pushing his small hands against the edge of the sled. It was a small but significant gesture, a sign that the boy was recovering and that the connection between them was mutual. Adar smiled, a tired but loving smile. Finally, in the late afternoon, a dark spot appeared on the horizon. The village. The small wooden huts, covered in snow, looked like an oasis of warmth and life. Adar felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost knocked him down. Warm tears streamed down his face, mixing with the cold sweat. He had made it. As they approached, figures began to emerge from the huts, drawn by the distant sound of the sled. First one, then two, and soon a small crowd formed. When Adar's sled finally stopped in the central square, a stunned silence hung in the air. Then a cry of joy erupted. It was Petya's mother running towards her son, tears streaming down her face. She embraced Petya with desperate strength, and the boy, now safe, cried with relief. The villagers surrounded Adar, their faces marked by a mixture of relief, admiration, and deep gratitude. No one spoke of his paralysis, only of his bravery. The old shaman, with tear-filled eyes, touched Adar's shoulder. "You brought the light back, my son," he said, his voice hoarse. "You showed us that true strength lies in the heart." Adar looked at Petya, who now smiled at him from his mother's embrace. He felt a deep peace, a sense of purpose fulfilled. Yakutia, with its relentless beauty and deadly dangers, had tested his soul. But he had proven that the human spirit, driven by altruism and ancestral wisdom, could overcome any adversity. He was Adar, the hunter, the guardian, and his journey had transformed into a living legend, an unwavering testament to the resilience and love that unite all. The village, warmed by the flame of his heroism, would flourish again, stronger than ever. The village, warmed by the flame of his heroism, would flourish again, stronger than ever. In the days that followed the miraculous rescue, a new energy hung in Yakutia's icy air. The blizzard finally subsided, revealing a deep blue sky and a sun that, though weak, promised clearer days. Petya recovered quickly, his childlike vitality returning with each laugh that echoed through the huts. His mother, with eyes brimming with gratitude, never left his side, but allowed the boy to visit Adar daily. Adar, in turn, felt his body exhausted, but his spirit was lighter. The pain in his arms and shoulders persisted, a reminder of the journey, but it was the pain of a purpose fulfilled, of a life saved. The villagers, once reclusive, now sought him out with reverence. The children, especially Petya, his faithful companion, looked at him with admiration. The boy sat beside the sled, listening to Adar's stories, not only about hunting, but about the secrets of the ice and the whispers of the wind that only he seemed to understand. The sled, damaged by the sacrifice of the resin, was repaired by the village artisans. They reinforced it with new wood and furs, transforming it into a symbol of Adar's courage. He was no longer Hunter Adar, the paralyzed man. He was Adar the guardian, the man who defied Yakutia and brought hope. His paralysis, once a limitation, was now part of his legend, an obstacle transmuted into strength and inspiration. The ancestral wisdom, which Adar used to decipher tracks and scare away bears, became more valued. The old shaman, who had encouraged him, now consulted him about the signs of nature, recognizing in him a vital link to the knowledge of the ancestors. Adar, with his powerful voice, shared his insights, always with the humility of one who understands the fragility of life and the interconnectedness of all things. The village, once shaken by despair and threat, found new unity. The story of Adar and Petya was told around the campfires, reminding everyone that even in adversity, love, altruism, and human resilience could flourish. The women gathered to sew warmer blankets, the men went out to hunt with renewed vigor, and everyone worked together, aware that the strength of one was the strength of all. Petya, growing up in the shadow of Adar's bravery, promised that one day he would be as courageous and altruistic as his savior. He watched Adar, absorbing every word and gesture, learning the deep language of resilience. Adar, in turn, saw in Petya not only the boy he saved, but the future of the village, the next generation to carry the torch of hope. Adar knew that Yakutia would remain relentless, with harsh winters and challenges. But he also knew that the village, united by an unbreakable bond of gratitude and admiration, was ready to face them. The legacy of his deed was not just the rescue of a boy, but the rediscovery of the community's soul. Adar, the paralyzed hunter, had become the pulsating heart of the village, a beacon of hope that shone brightly against the darkness of winter. And so, life in Yakutia, tough and challenging, continued, but now with new meaning, new strength, driven by the belief in the power of the human spirit.